Hi, I'm Anoop Nagendra. I gave the GMAT in September this year and I scored 720. I had actually given it once before and I'd scored a 700. So my motivation to give the GMAT again was primarily to improve my score. I work currently in a venture capital firm. I help the company invest into startups in India and the USA. Before this, I was working for about 2.5 years with Ernst & Young in their strategy consulting practice. Primarily, it was professional advancement. I realized my goals after I joined this venture capital fund, and that's essentially to one day probably start off my own impact investment incubator. But I did realize that besides just working in this field, I would also need to develop my personality and my professional acumen, and that's where business school really fits in. That was the motivation for me. Also to gain a global perspective on how early stage investing works in an international setting. I think it would be really helpful for me to work abroad and to see the ecosystem there as well. So post MBA, I'd like to get into a VC or an incubator and accelerator globally. So yeah, that's where the MBA fits in. It'll help me develop both personally and professionally. The biggest challenge is really to multitask everything that you're doing. For me, that was work essentially. And that was kind of the biggest hindrance the first time around when I wrote it. The second time around when I gave it, I did work at the same time and I practiced and I studied for the GMAT on an everyday basis, which actually turned out to be much better than taking, say, a month or a month and a half off and just only doing the GMAT. I guess it works differently for different people, but for me, what really worked was doing a little bit every day. And so the challenge is definitely to manage your workload at your office as well as to study for the GMAT. That's primarily the challenge. It's a bit hard also to go back into that mode where you're studying. I think for a lot of us who've been working for about 3-4 years, it takes a bit to get used to that. I met one of the team members at CrackVerbal at an MBA tour event. So there was just a desk and I walked up to them having already given the GMAT. The first time around, I studied entirely by myself. So I was trying to see how a structured approach would probably help me get a better score and just help me study. So the gap between my two exams were more than a year. So it was almost like starting off right from the beginning. So when I met them at the desk, I followed that up with a personal meeting. So what they really helped me, and the biggest point for me to choose CrackVerbal was actually when I met them for the first time, they asked me to get the enhanced score report, and we sat and analyzed my performance in the previous GMAT almost for about half an hour. Right there was a huge value add for me. Post enrolling with CrackVerbal, I think what was really useful was practicing the right problems. I think we take it for advantage. Our mindset is generally to practice as many problems, but CrackVerbal gave me a set of problems that were diverse and helped me work my skill sets in different areas that were needed for the test. So definitely I'd say the structured approach that CrackVerbal follows and the content itself that's circulated, and manage your time, like how do you allocate it? There's an Excel sheet for it. You don't need to physically check it. So I think all of those things really add up, and that's how I found my CrackVerbal experience to be great. Number one, give yourself enough time. A lot of people assume this is sort of any other standard testing exam, but it's really not. It's more tricky, I'd say, than it is difficult. And for you to master those little things that the test makers throw at you, it's important for you to practice over an extended period of time, trying to master all of those little kinks that come in the exam. And I think the other one would just be find a rhythm that really works for you. It may be that you're better off taking 1 month off and studying extensively, but it may also be that you're better at doing a little bit every day for a longer period of time. So essentially find what works for you and give yourself that time. I've applied to a few schools. I'm waiting to hear back. And I've also been waitlisted at a few, and I've got some acceptances, but I'm still yet to make a decision. So I'm waiting for more schools to get back to me, and most probably I'm headed this year for my MBA.